The North Atlantic does not forgive hunger. Picture a Viking ship far from shore. The sail snaps like a whip in the wind. Salt spray freezes along the gunwale. Oars creak in their locks. Beneath a sky the color of iron. There is no field to harvest, no oven, no safe fire, no market waiting over the next wave. Just cold water, wet wood, hard labor, and the slow, dangerous arithmetic of survival. Every mile from land turns food into time. And when time runs out, men die. Most people imagine Vikings surviving on courage alone, as if they could simply endure hunger the way they endured storms, as if a raiding crew, a trader, or a family bound for Iceland could trust brute strength to carry them across open sea. But strength burns quickly, muscle demands fuel, cold demands more, and the sea has a way of making every body empty faster than it should. The truth is stranger and far more impressive. Vikings did not merely carry food, they engineered it. Their survival trick was not one miraculous meal, but a hard, disciplined system of preserving energy before a voyage ever began. In barns, smokehouses, fish racks, dairies, and coopers' yards, they transformed fragile harvests into cargo that could survive cold, damp, distance, and time. The hidden weapon of the Viking voyage was not only the ship, it was the science of making food almost impossible to kill. That is the myth we get wrong. We picture Vikings as reckless men chasing horizons with axes in their hands and almost nothing else. It is a dramatic image. It is also incomplete. The people who crossed the North Sea, reached Iceland, settled Greenland, and pushed all the way toward North America were not gamblers trusting luck. They were planners moving through one of the harshest maritime environments on Earth. Their ships were masterpieces, yes, but a ship without reliable food is only a beautiful coffin. And ordinary food would fail quickly in their world. Fresh meat rots, wet grain molds, bread goes stale, then foul. Water turns sour in a cask. Fat can spoil. Fire is difficult and dangerous aboard a wooden vessel packed with wool, rope, tar, and men. Even if a crew could cook at intervals when conditions calmed, they could not depend on it. In bad weather, there would be no neat meal, no warm broth on demand. Food had to travel ready, dense, and tough enough to ignore the sea. That problem becomes even sharper when we remember the kinds of voyages Vikings made. A warship might hug coasts and rivers, landing often. A trader might cross longer stretches. A colonizing ship, likely a broader cargo vessel such as a nar, could vanish into the North Atlantic for days with animals, tools, timber, seed, and hopes for a new life packed under one hull. Some trips were short, some were not. Some turned ugly without warning. In all of them, the question remained the same. How do you keep a living body working when you cannot count on fresh food, safe water, or a fire? The answer begins with a material so plain it hardly looks like technology at all. Fish. Not fresh fish glistening in the net. Not a feast by the shore. Something harder, lighter, stranger. A food made by wind, cold, and patience. Archaeologists and historians have long pointed to dried fish as one of the great northern staples, and for good reason. In the cold air of the north, especially in places where cod and related fish were abundant, fish could be split, cleaned, and hung to dry in the open air. In the right conditions, cold enough to slow rot, breezy enough to pull out moisture, the flesh hardened instead of decaying. It became stockfish, stiff as wood, pale, fibrous, almost bone dry. This was the survival trick in its purest form. And it is easy to miss how specific that solution was to the Viking world. In warmer climates, preserving meat or fish often demanded large amounts of salt or heavy smoking. Scandinavia could use both methods, but salt was not always cheap or abundant enough to be the single answer for every voyage. The far north offered something else, long stretches of cold, moving air. Vikings recognized that their environment itself could preserve food if the fish were prepared correctly, and the season was right. That is not desperation, that is technical adaptation. Because stockfish solved several impossible problems at once. First, it defeated rot. Remove water, and most of the enemies of food lose their advantage. Bacteria struggle, decay slows. The fish becomes stable enough to store for months, even far longer in the right conditions. For a seafaring people, that changes everything. Suddenly, the summer catch is no longer trapped in summer. The coast can feed the voyage long after land disappears. Second, it defeated weight in a way fresh food never could. A ship has limits. Every extra pound matters. Water is heavy. Wet meat is heavy. Fresh supplies vanish fast. But dry fish concentrates nourishment into something smaller and lighter. A crew could pack serious calories and protein into a manageable volume. Not luxurious, not soft, but efficient. Viking travel often depended on brutal efficiency. Third, it required almost no fuel once prepared. That mattered enormously. Firewood took space. Cooking on a moving vessel was hazardous. A food that could be chewed, pounded, softened, or soaked when possible was far more useful than one that demanded a kitchen. Hard-dried fish could be eaten in strips, broken into bits, or worked into simpler meals once ashore. It was not elegant, it was dependable. At sea, dependable is everything. And perhaps most importantly, it fit the climate instead of fighting it. This is where Viking ingenuity becomes easy to miss. They did not invent a preservation system by overpowering nature. They built one out of northern weather itself. Cold air became a tool. Wind became a craftsman. Winter was not only an enemy, it was part of the workshop. That is a very different kind of intelligence from the one we usually celebrate. It is quieter, but it is everywhere in Viking survival. Look closer, and the engineering logic becomes even sharper. A Viking ship was a wet place. Spray came over the sides. Condensation formed. Bilge water gathered low in the hull. Anything stored carelessly would absorb damp, swell, sour, or mold. So preserved food had to be tough enough to endure a hostile environment, and it had to be packed with care. Chests, sacks, tubs, and casks were not random clutter. They were part of the system. Supplies were kept off the wettest bottom of the hull when possible, protected from direct soaking, distributed around the vessel so weight stayed manageable and access stayed practical. The container mattered almost as much as the food. This brings us to another quiet technology of survival, the wooden cask. The Viking world knew skilled woodworking at a very high level. The same culture that could split oak, shape planks, rivet hulls, and bend timber for ships could also build containers that were light, strong, and repairable. Coopering was not glamorous compared with shipbuilding, but it solved a central problem of travel. A good cask could carry liquids, butter, grain, or preserved foods inside a structure that flexed with a ship instead of shattering like pottery. In a world of rough movement and salt air, that mattered. And those liquids mattered too. Fresh water does not always stay fresh. On a long voyage, stored water can taste foul or become suspect. So crews likely relied not only on water, but also on drinks and foods that aged more safely. Ale, sour whey, fermented dairy products, perhaps depending on region, season, and the purpose of the voyage. These were not luxuries. Fermentation was another form of engineering. It used controlled spoilage to prevent worse spoilage. It turned unstable nourishment into something longer lasting and often easier on the stomach than stagnant water. Dairy may seem like an unlikely ally at sea, but in the Viking world it was crucial. Milk itself dies quickly. Turn it into cultured products, and it survives. Skyr-like cultured dairy, sour milk products, butter packed carefully in tubs, even foods preserved in acidic whey. All of these belong to the same survival logic. The Viking household did not simply consume what the cow or sheep gave that day, it transformed it. It thickened, soured, churned, strained, and stored. By the time a ship launched, the labor of women, dairy workers, and household managers had already been converted into portable endurance. Think about what that means for the image of a voyage. The dramatic moment is the ship leaving the fjord, men at the oars, the sail rising, the prow turning to sea. But the voyage really started months earlier. It started where fish were hung in cold air and watched carefully for rot. It started where grain was dried, ground, and protected from damp. It started where butter was churned and sealed. It started where casks were tightened, staves fitted, hoops secured, and every container tested against leakage. A Viking crossing was not improvised heroism. It was the final stage of a long supply chain. Even grain had to be rethought for this world. Barley and oats were common staples, but loose grain alone was vulnerable. It took work to turn it into voyage food. Meal could travel better than wet dough. Hard bread or flatbread could last better than a fresh loaf. Porridge might wait for landfall or calmer water. On board, the ideal ration was not something delicious. It was something stable, something that could sit in a bag or cask, resist damp long enough, and deliver energy when rowers or sailors needed it most. This is why dried fish stands at the center of the story. Meat could be preserved too, by drying, smoking, salting where salt was available, but fish was often the perfect northern answer. It was abundant in many coastal regions, it dried well in cold climates, and unlike some fattier meats, it could become remarkably durable. To modern eyes, it may look primitive. In reality, it is a brilliantly optimized travel food for a maritime culture living on the edge of cold seas. There was another advantage hidden inside that hardness. Dried fish forced discipline. It did not invite feasting. It made rationing easier because it was work to eat and easy to count. A crew that burned through soft, tempting food in the first days of a voyage would be in danger later. A cargo of tough, preserved food slowed appetite down. It turned nourishment into measured endurance. That matters more than it sounds. Survival at sea is partly about storage technology, but it is also about controlling human behavior under stress. And of course, the Vikings did not rely on one thing alone. Fishing from a vessel could supplement supplies when weather allowed. Landing to gather fresh water, hunt, or cook was possible on many routes, especially in coastal travel. Colonizing voyages could carry livestock on broader cargo ships, bringing sheep, goats, cattle, and poultry as living stores of value and future survival. But none of those backups would matter without a preserved core. Storms cancel fishing, coasts disappear in mist, animals consume precious space and fodder. The dependable heart of the system had to be food already stabilized before departure. This is where ship design and food design meet. Even the rhythm of travel helped explain the system. Vikings often preferred routes that allowed landfalls, fresh water, repairs, and information from local coasts. But often is not always. Fog, contrary winds, storms, drifting ice, or simply the long empty distances of the North Atlantic could stretch a journey past its ideal plan. A survival ration had to cover not only the expected voyage, but the voyage when the sea changed its mind. That is another reason preserved food mattered so much. It bought margin. It gave a crew extra days against uncertainty. The famous longship was fast, flexible, and shallow, ideal for sudden landings and river travel. The broader Nar was slower, deeper, and better for cargo across open water. Different hulls served different purposes, but both reveal the same truth. Viking seafaring was not just about movement. It was about carrying a working world with you. Woodworking, rope making, sail weaving, tool forging, and food preservation all had to align. A voyage was not one invention. It was a chain of inventions holding each other up. Now imagine the human experience inside that system. A crew wakes before dawn under damp wool cloaks. The ship smells of tar, salt, wet timber, bodies, and old provisions. Hands are cracked from cold. Lips are dry from wind. Someone reaches into a chest or sack and pulls out hard-preserved food. No feast, no heroic banquet, just another ration. Another bite of something prepared months before by people who may be far behind the horizon now. And yet that bite is a kind of miracle, because hidden inside it are forests cut for casks, fisheries worked in season, women managing dairies, farmers protecting grain, smiths forging tools, shipwrights shaping hulls, and sailors understanding how much weight a vessel can bear before safety turns against speed. The Vikings who crossed oceans did not travel alone, even when only a few dozen people stood on deck. Entire communities traveled with them in the form of stored labor. This is one of the most overlooked truths about ancient technology. We tend to admire the visible machine, the ship, the sword, the hull, but often the real breakthrough is the system around it. A longship is astonishing. So is the rigging. So is the clinker-built hull, flexing with the sea instead of fighting it. Yet none of that matters if the people aboard run out of energy. A civilization capable of long-distance seafaring in the North Atlantic had to solve food with the same seriousness it solved timber and sailcloth, and it did. There is also a deeper philosophy buried in this survival trick. The Vikings did not conquer the North by pretending it was gentle. They understood its cruelty. They knew the cold could kill, the sea could erase, and wetness could ruin almost everything made by hand. Their answer was not to dream of perfect control. Their answer was adaptation. Use the wind to dry fish. Use fermentation to stabilize milk. Use wood because it can flex. Use wool because it keeps warmth when damp. Use the season, the climate, the coastline, the animal, the tree, the microbe. Work with the world as it is, not as you wish it would be. That mindset is engineering in its oldest form, not abstract equations on paper, but repeated contact with failure until a culture learns what survives, what shape does not crack, what food does not rot, what sail still pulls in cold spray, what container keeps its seams, what habit prevents panic, what route offers a chance to refill water. Every successful voyage was a verdict. Some methods lived on because they worked, others disappeared because the sea judged them harshly. And that may be why the story still feels so powerful now. Because Viking endurance was never just violence, never just daring, never just myth. It was competence under pressure. It was the ability to take a world of frost, fish, timber, iron, and darkness and build a practical answer to hunger. Not a romantic answer, not an easy answer, a hard answer, as hard as dried cod, as plain as a barrel stave, as reliable as a sail stitched well enough to survive another gale. So why didn't Vikings starve on long voyages? Because they refused to bring ordinary food into an extraordinary environment. They transformed food before the journey began. They dried it, soured it, churned it, packed it, counted it, and paired it with ships designed to carry survival without wasting space. Their real trick was preservation as engineering, a way of trapping summer, pasture, and coastline inside cargo tough enough to cross cold water. That is more than a culinary detail. It is a lost intelligence. It reminds us that one of the greatest technologies of the Viking world was not forged in iron or carved into a prow. It was built out of patience, weather, wood, and biological knowledge passed through households and harbors generation after generation. The same culture that mastered the sea also learned how to make nourishment survive the sea. And somewhere out on dark water, with the wind rising and land gone, that knowledge mattered more than glory. Because when the oars grew heavy and the horizon vanished into rain, no saga line, no boast, no weapon could feed a crew. Only the quiet technologies could do that. The fish hardened by cold air, the butter sealed in wood, the sour dairy that kept a little longer, the grain protected from damp, the cask that did not leak, the ration not eaten too soon. The community labor hidden inside every mouthful. That was the real survival trick. And maybe that is the most impressive thing about Viking engineering. Its greatest victories were not always the loudest ones. Sometimes they were the invisible solutions that kept people alive long enough to reach the next shore. If there's another Viking or ancient engineering mystery you want explored next, leave it in the comments. There are many more hidden technologies waiting in the cold.